Dalmartian, a Mars rover's story by Ruth Cummins. The visitors came to Stephen's yard one otherwise ordinary summer night. Quietly and carefully, they went about their work, collecting, bagging, and tagging specimens. Then, very suddenly, they had company. The visitors raced to reboard their ship. One of the visitors wasn't quite quick enough. So one was left behind. Stephen invited the guest into his home. The guest graciously accepted. After giving him the tour, Stephen showed his guest to his room. At first, Stephen and his guest disagreed about the sleeping arrangements. But eventually they came to a comfortable compromise. The following morning, Stephen served his guest a delicious breakfast. Stephen's guest wasn't hungry, but he did make a polite effort to taste what he was offered. They eventually reached another compromise. It went over well. After breakfast, Stephen suggested a walk and some fresh air. They finally did get walking and fresh airing. But first, to get walking and fresh airing, they had to get on the same page. As they walked, Stephen told his guest about the town's founders and about the local industry. He pointed out historic homes and told his guest about the Winter Carnival. He also spoke proudly of the time at the Winter Carnival he had puked not once, but twice after riding the tilt-a-whirl. At that point, they reached the park. Stephen was sure his guest would enjoy tossing the ball around. But Stephen was very wrong. And to make matters worse, the other noses at the park were very nosy. And to make matters worser, they made their business everybody's business. On their walk home, Stephen pointed out the local flora and fauna and the various restaurants that had opened and closed over the years in a particular location, cursed, and he spoke of his fondness for mustard on hamburgers and how he loathed ketchup. And then they had supper together. That night, Stephen went to bed, but his guest stayed up and stared hopefully at the night sky, expecting his crewmates to return. When the sun rose, his heart sank. The following morning, they had breakfast and a walk And another laugh. After supper, Stephen shared his favorite book in his favorite spot with his favorite guest. That night, Stephen's guest went straight to sleep. And that same night, they came back. And so Stephen's guest quietly departed. Since their journey home would be a long one, they decided they should all get some rest. All but one did. Stephen's guest lay awake and thought about home. He thought about bacon, of course, but mostly he thought about Stephen, his host, his friend. Stephen himself suddenly woke up thinking about his guest, his friend, who he discovered was no longer there. Stephen's heart sank. And at that very moment, far, far away, Stephen's friend felt where home was, and he headed in that direction. But when the sun rose the next morning, they were both right where they belonged. They would always be very close. But they did decide to always keep their business to themselves.